Hi, my name is Julissa, and my question is, hi, my name is Julissa, and my question is, what were the differences? What were the differences between regular government schools and the Panther community schools?
Well, the as you say, government school, first of all, in terms of the curriculum, did not teach the truth. So while we celebrated Thomas Jefferson, we didn't bother to mention in the government schools that Thomas Jefferson was one of the biggest slaveholders America had and became president by really identifying the slave population as part of his constituency. Otherwise, he would have lost the election to Aaron Burr. So that's just one example. We don't even speak about slavery in any of the history books in America, certainly not in elementary school. So you don't even know that there was slavery. It is certainly a white dominated racist culture that is encouraged in the public schools. More importantly, or as importantly, the schools are all supported by money based on where the school is located. So if you're poor people, you won't get any money for your school, and you'll end up with a classroom filled with people, overwhelming number of people that you cannot teach at one time because it's too many. You will not have children who will have food, which is why we started our breakfast program, because the children in the better schools, meaning the rich schools or richer, they have money to buy lunch, money to bring lunch, and so forth. So the differences are, the big difference is that we had a foundation that said we wanted, based on our 5th program point, which was we wanted education that teaches us our true history and the true nature of our oppression. We never learned that. So in our school we did, but more importantly, as far as systems in place, we fed our children 3 meals a day, all free, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We transported them safely through the various hoods that they came from. There was a public housing right across the street from our school. We had classrooms of no more than 10 children. Children could come there as early as 2 or 3, as long as they didn't pee on themselves, they could walk. We passed all the tests because children had no reason to worry about anything at all because they were being fed, and we clothed children. We took care of their teeth, their health care. We took care of some of their home life. So we took care of the children because we felt that the school was a centerpiece of their lives and of their families and the community that could be a base for the rise of our people being educated toward becoming self-determining, as we would call it. So there was a big, big difference between what our ideology was, our ideals, as well as our practice at the Oakland Community School versus the public schools in the United States, which remain segregated for whatever that's worth. And it's not worth a lot because segregation was never really the issue. Education was the issue. But the point is, nothing has been done since the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision, which I hope you would learn about if you don't already know, where there was a question of segregation was a factor in denying Black children a full education. And so therefore we ended up with the busing programs and desegregation, which never panned out to do it very much of anything except for cause everybody to be mad. People died and everything else for that. But our school was to set a model, and we attempted to do that. And I'm glad to see that you're using some of the things that we put into place for your school. But I think lastly, one of the most important things we did was we made sure that the children had a life that was complete in terms of their food and housing and healthcare, so that by the time they got to the classroom, they were free of those kinds of problems in order to learn what they needed to learn. And lastly, we had a slogan. Our slogan was, we don't teach children what to think, we teach them how to think.
I have a question. My name is Alfred. I'm 11 years old. I'm in grade 6. Can you please tell us about how the Justice Committee function?
Well, you mean in terms of the school?
Yes.
Well, I didn't operate day to day, but the idea of the Justice Committee was to simply be a kind of where we can come together in a format in which children could resolve conflict. So that's really what it is. And so, I think there were some children who were a part of the overall sort of judge group, but maybe not. But the idea would be that how can we resolve conflict nonviolently, because we were brothers and sisters and we had no reason to have violent conflict because we were not enemies. And we had to show each other that, and we had to figure out ways to have a discussion, and whatever way was best at the time, then it was left to the students with some guide, obviously by the teachers, some teachers, as to what would be fit in terms of if you violated another comrade, another brother or sister, then did you have to address that offense and correct it and not just let it slide. For example, my own daughter, when she was about, I don't know, 6, she and another boy conspired to steal a Cracker Jack's toy from another boy. After they conspired and stole the toy from him, I mean, they didn't steal it, they just ripped it out of his hand, basically. And after they did that, then my daughter stole it from her co-conspirator. And so she had to deal with that, and she was not very happy. She did not want to discuss anything about being a thief. And she had to address the fact that she stole from one person and then a second one. And so she had to acknowledge that. And it was very difficult for her to acknowledge that she had stolen from her own brothers. But she had to do it. And it was a fitting punishment for her to apologize, to first acknowledge that she had violated them, and then to acknowledge that she apologized. And I don't know what else she had to do. She was only 6, but I was pretty upset about it.
Okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Hi, I'm from Hannah. Are there schools that are currently modeled?
I cannot hear you. I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm from China. Are there schools that are currently modeled after the Oakland Community School?
You say, are there schools that can be modeled? Is that the question? Would the teacher help me a little?
Currently modeled.
Are currently modeled?
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any. You have a lot of charter schools in America and in the United States, and most of them have their own agenda, which is just basically to be pretty selective. And in many ways, they're very narrow in focus. So they focus on a certain group of children. But I did, and I wish I could play it for you, I did go to a school called Roses in Concrete. It became a charter school, meaning that it was being funded by the public school system, but it had its own charter to focus on certain other things. And I think they were the closest that I ever saw to what the Black Panther Party school was. They didn't necessarily feed the children all day. And I think the parents had to pay some money. Our school was totally free, but they had a kind of ideal and a way of thinking and that they were more progressive in their agenda and in their curriculum than the other schools. So I will say that I ran across one that I can think of right now, but there may be others I'm not aware of.
Hi, I'm Jay. In today's age, in what ways of organizing communities have changed since the 1970s?
Well, so you mean what do I think in terms of like movements and, organizing groups that are organizing around progressive ideals? Well, I think there's pretty obviously a big gap because so many of the so-called groups, such as, or so-called movements like Black Lives Matter exist in the ether world, meaning and online, but I don't know where they exist in real life. This is all virtual movements. So that means that for me, from my perspective, and people don't like this when I say it, I don't see any movement at all in the United States that challenges the government. I mean, when people say things like defund the police, it's a slogan. It has no meaning and there's nobody there to enforce it. I look at the murder of George Floyd and I see however many people standing around filming and watching the murder of a man and doing absolutely nothing but crying about it, whining about it. And then the whole world explodes and says, oh, we got to march, George Floyd. Well, that was a good, consciousness raiser, but where do we go from here? So there's no ongoing movement that came out of that, where people are making the kind of commitment that people made who were following Dr. King with SCLC, where a whole year, Black people didn't ride a bus in Montgomery just to get a seat on a bus, and people didn't ride. So it was an organizing effort where people took part and sacrificed. And people like Fannie Lou Hamer, who lost her eye being beaten by the police, trying to get the vote for Black people. I don't see that level of commitment today, period, much less organized commitment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Anybody have any other questions? Anybody?
Okay.
A lot of the questions sort of you answered that we had prior, you answered in answering some of these questions. So yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, that's it. Somebody's got a hand up.
Hamza.
Wait, I didn't know how to. I was like, raise my head. I don't know.
Madison, do you have a question? Okay. I guess what a question that we sort of were thinking about was, what advice do you have for these students moving forward in terms of what they should demand in schools for their education with the schools that they're going to go through?
Well, what they should demand, we didn't believe too much in protest, and spending a lot of time talking to somebody who's clearly doesn't have your interest in heart and expecting them going to change because you gave them your ideas and you protest and so forth. That's why we created the Black Panther School. So the question would be, the school system, I don't know there, but I'm sure it's the same thing, is already a system in place. So it's not like one school here, or you can go in and say, we want to have, more whatever. You could, and you could, demand food for all I know. I don't know what the story is on people getting food. You could demand that children have free food. You could demand that classrooms be reduced. But what will you do to enforce that demand? And what will you do to take action? And so, because without action, theory and practice go together. So we can have a theory and no practice, and a practice and no theory. Either way, it's not going to work. So the question would be, what do you mean when you say, what can they be doing to demand? What should they be demanding? Well, what's wrong? So the first thing you have to do is identify a problem. What is the problem? And if the problem is, the whole system is screwed up, which I'm sure it is, then you have to figure out how you can attack that by starting with everybody to do that. So like our breakfast program that everybody knows about, remember, it was just a breakfast program. This was not some deep revolutionary activity, but in fact it was, because we got everybody involved in one thing. And that one thing was that children had deserved and had to eat. And if you didn't have the money, they can't be forced to go to school and try to sit in a classroom and learn something while being hungry. So we set the example by action, but not by saying we want to see the school do this, but by providing it. And ultimately the people did make that demand, but you had a mass demand of people that could enforce it because the school system couldn't overwhelm the mass demand. So if we think in terms of my little individual thing that I want to do, then we are lost. So the question before this, talking about organizing, the big piece is to be organized, because one person making one demand or two people making a demand, but where you have a whole community saying, this is what we want, but you have to decide, what do you want? We wrote a 10-point platform and program called What We Want and What We Believe. And the first thing we said we wanted was freedom. And then we said we wanted housing. Now that we know what we want, what are we going to do to get there? And ultimately, we realized that our program could not be manifested without revolutionary change. Now, I'm not telling these children that, but if they want to become self-determining, they too will have to organize themselves. But I don't think at this age, you have a parent and guardians and people who are behaving like parents that have to be guides in this, because you're not trying to get people killed, because if you ain't playing, you might get killed. Because ain't nobody here worried about, unless the children make a march, but they can't do one day, they can't do one thing. There has to be an ongoing organizing effort, and they have to discuss, what do they want? What do they think is needed? And once they make that decision with people who are being their parents and guides and guardians, then they can make an effort that they can lead. But it's not going to happen because we just say, well, what should you be doing to have a beautiful education and grow up into being perhaps revolutionaries or progressive people. And we try to do things like that. But I think that for these young people, the very fact that they're here and wanting to listen to anything I have to say, that gives them a level of consciousness. And I think they can talk about, well, what would we want to see in the public schools? Well, do we want changes? And have discussions and begin to say, okay, well, what can we do? What can we do given our limitations in age, in money, in power, in just being small people? It ain't like you're gonna get out here and act crazy. You better not, because you can get hurt. We don't want you to be hurt. We want you to be loved. So that would be what I would say. Bye-bye.
Nelson, see you, comrades.
All right. Thank you.